An American president flying over the Atlantic, calmly telling reporters that the United States is now in charge of a sovereign nation 1,000 miles away. Not through occupation, not through elections, but through pressure, force, and fear. This is not Iraq. It may be more dangerous. Because what happened in Venezuela is not a war of transformation. It is a war of leverage. Nicolás Maduro is gone, but the system he built is still standing. And Washington now believes it can bend that system to its will quietly, efficiently, decisively. President Trump calls it leadership. His allies call it realism. But history tells us something else. When great powers confuse control with compliance, the consequences arrive later and hit harder. If you want to understand why this moment matters far beyond Venezuela, stay with me. And if this kind of clear-eyed global analysis matters to you, this is exactly when you should subscribe, because what comes next explains everything. To understand what the Trump administration is trying to do, we need to be precise. This is not about rebuilding Venezuela. It is not about exporting democracy. And it is not about installing a new political vision. It is about control without responsibility. Washington's goal is narrowly defined: force whoever holds power in Caracas to meet American demands. Stop drug flows, push out Iranian, Cuban, Russian, and Chinese influence. Reopen oil production under conditions favorable to the United States. And do it all without sending American soldiers to govern Venezuelan streets. That is why Delcy Rodríguez matters so much. She is not the future Washington once endorsed. She is the remainder of a system Washington despised but now hopes to use. This strategy assumes something crucial: that fear, pressure, and economic leverage can substitute for legitimacy, that a government can function while answering outward, not inward. That compliance can be sustained without consent. History suggests this is a dangerous assumption, and to see why, we need to step back into Venezuela's past and America's long memory in the region. To understand why Venezuela reached this point, you have to look beyond personalities and into cycles. Venezuela's crisis did not begin with Nicolás Maduro. It began with a system built on oil dependency, centralized power, and the belief that the state, not institutions, could permanently manage society. Hugo Chavez turned oil wealth into political loyalty. Maduro inherited the structure, but without the boom that sustained it. As prices fell, repression rose. Sanctions tightened. The economy hollowed out. Millions left. What remained was a regime that survived not because it was popular, but because it controlled the armed actors, the courts, and the cash that still flowed through oil and illicit networks. The United States, meanwhile, has a 200-year history of intervening in Latin America when instability threatens its interests. From covert operations to open pressure, Washington has often believed it could engineer outcomes faster than societies could produce them. That belief is back. Trump's move reflects a familiar cycle. When diplomacy stalls and patience runs out, power steps in. But power rarely ends stories. It usually accelerates them. And in Venezuela, that acceleration has already triggered the first crisis point. The first crisis arrived the moment Maduro was removed. From Washington's perspective, it looked like success. A clean operation, minimal bloodshed, a symbolic enemy extracted and placed before an American court. A show of force meant to freeze resistance in its tracks. But inside Venezuela, the shock worked differently. Power did not disappear. It fractured. Ministries froze. Security chiefs recalculated loyalties. Regional strongmen waited, watching not Washington but each other. The removal of the figure at the top created silence, not stability. This is the paradox of decapitation strategies. They eliminate a person, not a system. And systems hate vacuums. The Trump administration now faces an urgent dilemma. Move too fast, and the state collapses into infighting. Move too slow, and rivals inside and outside the regime begin to test limits. That is why pressure intensified immediately. Public threats, oil embargoes, signals of further military action. The message was simple: Cooperate or you are next. But fear is a brittle foundation for governance. And as history shows, the more pressure applied, the more unpredictable the response becomes. Which brings us to the most important and least visible part of the story. What sits beneath all of this is a hidden mechanism that Washington is betting everything on: coercive substitution. Instead of building a new order, the United States is trying to plug itself into an old one. The theory is simple: keep the bureaucracy intact, avoid purges, leave the security services untouched, and redirect loyalty upward toward Washington's demands. Delcy Rodríguez is central to this bet. She offers continuity without Maduro, familiarity without chaos, a face the system already knows. To American planners, that looks like stability. But this mechanism has a flaw. Rodríguez does not command the system. She negotiates with it. Armed factions, intelligence services, party elites, and economic power brokers all have veto power. Each one is calculating how far American pressure will really go and when it might stop. That is why threats keep escalating. Naval forces offshore, sanctions held in place, public warnings of a bigger price. Coercion must stay credible or the mechanism collapses. Yet credibility demands commitment, and commitment demands resources. Here lies the contradiction. Washington wants control without ownership, influence without administration, obedience without legitimacy. History tells us that systems caught in this squeeze do not reform. They either harden or explode. And Venezuela is already moving toward its second breaking point. The second crisis is unfolding not with explosions, but with calculation. Every threat from Washington sharpens the dilemma inside Caracas. Cooperate and risk being labeled a traitor by hardliners who still control guns and territory. Resist and invite a deeper American strike that could dismantle what remains of the regime's power. This is where coercion meets its limit. The United States can apply pressure from the air, from the sea, from intelligence channels, but it cannot micromanage fear inside a fractured elite. It cannot see every bargain being cut in back rooms, and it cannot easily distinguish between compliance and delay. That is why Delcy Rodríguez's position is so fragile. Publicly, she must appear defiant enough to survive. Privately, she must signal just enough openness to avoid escalation. One misstep, one perceived betrayal could trigger internal retaliation or external punishment. Washington's warnings of bigger consequences are meant to clarify choices, but they may be doing the opposite, pushing Venezuelan power brokers to hedge, stall, or quietly undermine the very cooperation the US wants. This is the dangerous middle zone. Not war, not peace, but sustained tension. And when states live too long in this space, the costs stop being abstract. They land on ordinary people. If you are an ordinary Venezuelan, none of this feels strategic. It feels personal. You are not debating leverage or legitimacy. You are counting hours without electricity, watching prices change between morning and night, deciding whether to leave your country or endure one more month inside it. This is the cruel irony of great power coercion. It targets elites, but it squeezes societies. Sanctions freeze oil revenues. Uncertainty paralyzes investment. Fear slows administration. And the burden flows downward onto families who have already absorbed years of collapse. For many Venezuelans, Maduro's fall was supposed to be the end of suffering. Instead, it has opened a new limbo. Democracy feels postponed. Stability feels conditional. And the future feels negotiated somewhere far away, in Washington studios and war rooms. When power is exercised without accountability, people become collateral. Not because anyone intends it, but because no one is fully responsible. If this story matters to you not as ideology, but as human reality, this is when your attention matters most. Stay with me. Share this analysis. These moments decide more than borders. Because what's happening in Venezuela does not stay in Venezuela. It never does. What unfolds in Venezuela is already rippling far beyond its borders. In Latin America, governments are watching closely, not because they support Maduro's system, but because they are measuring a precedent. If Washington can claim it is running Venezuela through force and coercion, what does that say to Colombia, to Mexico, to any state that drifts out of line? Trump's comments about Colombia being very sick and Mexico needing to get their act together were not offhand remarks. They were signals. Power once used tends to announce itself. Globally, rivals are also taking notes. Russia and China see another example of American unilateralism. Iran and Cuba see pressure that could one day be applied to them. Each actor adjusts, not just in Venezuela, but across the system, strengthening alliances, hardening defenses, preparing counter-moves. This is how regional interventions become global calculations. The danger is not immediate escalation, it is normalization. A world where coercion replaces consensus, where sovereignty becomes conditional, where force is justified by efficiency. That world is more unstable than it looks. And it leaves us with one unavoidable question. Where does this path lead? The answer lies in the futures now opening before Venezuela and the United States itself. From this point forward, Venezuela's future splits into three possible paths. The first is the optimistic scenario. Pressure works. Delcy Rodríguez gradually aligns with Washington's demands. Oil revenues restart under tight oversight. External rivals are pushed out. Over time, the regime loosens. Elections follow, and Venezuela transitions slowly towards something resembling legitimacy. It is orderly, it is managed, and it allows the United States to claim success with minimal cost. The second is the muddled reality most systems fall into. Compliance is partial. Deals are made, then delayed. Elites cooperate just enough to survive while preserving core power. Sanctions ease but do not vanish. Democracy remains promised, never delivered. Venezuela stabilizes but in a gray zone, neither free nor fully controlled. The third path is the darkest. Coercion fails, internal factions fracture, violence resurfaces, Washington escalates to preserve credibility, resources follow force. What began as leverage turns into entanglement. The very scenario Trump sought to avoid ownership without exit returns. These are not moral choices. They are structural outcomes. Systems respond to pressure according to their internal logic, not external intentions. And that is the final illusion power often carries, that the future can be dictated. It cannot. Which brings us to the lesson this moment leaves behind. This moment is not really about Venezuela. It is about how power is used when patience runs out. President Trump believes strength clarifies outcomes. That force, applied cleanly and decisively, can bend reality without owning it. Sometimes he is right, briefly, but history is unambiguous about what follows when coercion replaces consent. You can remove a leader, you can frighten an elite, you can even extract short-term compliance. What you cannot do is govern a society from offshore without eventually paying the price of responsibility. By turning away from Venezuela's democratic movement and betting on regime remnants, the United States risks trading values for leverage and discovering that leverage expires faster than values do. When power becomes the only language, it must be spoken louder each time. And that is the danger ahead. Not collapse tomorrow, but entanglement over time. If you want to understand how this pattern repeats from Latin America to the Middle East to Asia, stay with me. Share this analysis, subscribe for the next chapter, because the most important question is no longer who runs Venezuela. It is what kind of world we are choosing to run.